Hello guys, and welcome to a video about... Well, honestly, I kind of struggled on what to call this video, but we're basically going to be explaining some more advanced concepts that are important for air battles, but in a way that's quick and simple to understand. Mainly with information that's relevant to you as a War Thunder player. So, as a disclaimer, things may be simplified for ease of understanding and may not be 100% true to real life, but neither is War Thunder. But the goal here is that even a beginner can watch this video and learn some important things or maybe an interesting fact or two that will help you play the game a bit better. And for people new to aviation terms, the elevators are these flappy boys at the back of the plane, and they will come up more than once in the video. So don't forget to smash that like and subscribe, and we'll get into the video. So we'll start off with weight, because it's pretty easy to understand, and well, there's a lot to it. But generally speaking, more weight is more bad. Who would have guessed? But to be, not facetious, there you learnt a new word today, the heavier something is, the more momentum it has, so the harder it is to change its direction of travel. That's important for two main reasons. The first is going to be acceleration. The heavier you are, the harder it is for your engine to push against the weight and get it moving. But secondly, the harder it is to change your direction of travel and thus turn or dogfight. The elevators, the flappy boys, are doing the heavy lifting here, pun intended. And as your plane gets heavier, the elevators don't get bigger, so your instantaneous turn gets worse. Instant turn rate is how fast you can turn while you pull the stick as hard as you can, as opposed to sustained turn rate, which is how tightly you can turn in, well, a sustained turn. So for an extended period of time. Little bonus one for you there. So how do we reduce our weight? Well, there are three main ways. The first is by just not taking any suspended ordnance like bombs or rockets, which is fairly obvious. Most people will have figured that one out, I hope. The second is through modifications, which is something that you might not be aware of. Even on the absolute lightest planes in the game, like the Ki 43 or the Zero in the Japanese tree, you can still remove over 50 kilos of weight this way. And on bigger planes like top tier jets, it can be many hundreds of kilograms of weight. It's just yet another reason why you should focus on the flight performance section of the upgrades over the more flashy things like bombs and offensive belts and things like that. But the big one, and the one that most of you will have thought of straight away, I hope, the one that you can easily control, is fuel. A good, or well, bad example for propeller planes is the Zero, again, our little friend. Minimum fuel is only about 5% additional weight compared to your airframe's, normal weight. But max is nearly 20%. That's a lot of weight to be carrying around for no reason. But generally speaking, as you go up and up in the battle ratings, this problem gets worse because jets carry more fuel and they have thirsty engines. I mean, most afterburning jets, you're getting close to 50% of your starting weight in fuel. As in, if you weigh 3 tons, you got 1.5 tons of fuel on top of that, making you 4.5 tons. So 50% more than your empty weight. Regardless, we're talking, in most cases, tons of fuel. Literally tons. So it's important that you take into account how much fuel do you actually use in a game. Let's say you're going out and you're bombing bases because you're boring. How much fuel does it take for you to get there and get back again? Because obviously if you take a lot of extra fuel that you're carrying around for no reason, you're going to be slower and easier to catch. But you also have to take into account top tier jets are quite thirsty. So a way around this can be to run a drop tank. You run a drop tank that's completely full of fuel and then only run the fuel that you need to dogfight and then return to base. That way, you can just jettison the drop tank when you don't need it anymore, and then you immediately have your dogfighting fuel weight ready to go. Next, we have Parasite Drag, which I think is a mistranslation, as it's more commonly known as parasitic drag, so that's what I'm going to call it going on. Now, this can get horribly complicated, so I'm just going to explain it in a more basic way. Again, the disclaimer from the start, these are simplifications. So you can think of drag as coming in two main categories. You've got lift-induced drag and parasitic drag. You can kind of think of induced drag as good drag because it's mainly caused by the wings as they produce the lift that keeps your plane in the air. There isn't really a lot you can do about induced drag. So parasitic drag, what is that? It's basically everything else, and it's bad because it makes you go slower, right? This is further split down into two main categories of friction drag or skin friction drag and form drag. Skin friction drag is exactly what it sounds like. Bumpy, rough, or pitted surfaces cause turbulence in the airflow as they move over the surface. Again, this can really only be changed with modifications, and it is yet another reason that stock planes suck. A stock plane isn't actually stock like it comes out of the factory. You can think of it as like an old, worn down, combat used version of the aircraft. So, replacing the skin fabric on the wings to make them nice and smooth makes you go faster because there's less drag. The other is form drag, which is caused by the shape of something. Flat things cause a lot of drag, whereas, smooth and rounded surfaces cause less. And this is what suspended ordnance causes. So, if you have to drag something through the air, the keyword there is drag, it's going to resist that movement by pushing air out of the way. Again, not something you can really change because if you want to take bombs, you're going to have to deal with the drag that the bombs take. But if you have the option to use a bomb bay, you should always do that. Suspended ordnance is bad. Internal ordnance in a bomb bay doesn't cause drag because, well, it's inside and therefore not in the airstream, right? Bear in mind that parasitic drag is a multiplier. In-game, it's classed as a multiplier. Have you ever considered why on a jet that produces 10,000 kgf of force, that you look at the parasite drag on your ordnance and it's like 0.3 or something? Like, wow, my plane has 0.0003% less like energy or whatever. Like, no, that's not how it works. It's a coefficient or a multiplier. Bear in mind, the faster you go, the more drag you will get because of this multiplier. And I won't go into this further because the way that War Thunder calculates it is, again, different. It's a whole bunch of coefficients and multipliers, and it gets very complicated very quickly. Way beyond the scope of this video. But this brings us quite neatly onto our next topic, which is compression, or what you will have been heard referred to as compression. It's probably better to call it control stiffening, but compression is the term that people are familiar with and that gets used a lot, so I'll go with that term. So, have you ever been in a situation where you're in a very steep dive chasing an enemy, and then suddenly that red text pops up, reduced speed, and you think, oh boy. You try to pull out of your dive, but you just can't. Your plane's just not coming up as fast as it should. Well, then you've been a victim of compression. The problem is, the faster you go, the harder it is to push your control surfaces into that stream of fast-moving air. Think of it like you're trying to open a car door on a really windy day. You're going to need a lot more force because that wind is pushing against the door as you try to push it out. This is pretty much exactly what's happening with the elevators or the ailerons on your plane when you're going too quickly. And different planes suffer from compression at different rates. For example, there are planes that have hydraulically powered ailerons that let you roll around, but the elevator is just through muscle power. So your elevators will compress a lot more quickly than your ailerons will. Or your rudder, for example. So this is going to depend on your plane, and it's going to depend on your own personal experience, right, of learning what compressors at what speed on what plane, because it's different for all of them. Needless to say, though, if you're going too fast in a dive, it can lead to explosive consequences. But again, this also leads on to corner speed, because compression is also quite important for that, especially in World War II era planes, but more widely in War Thunder in general. Corner speed is, at its most fundamental, the speed at which you can pull the tightest turn if you yank the stick as hard as you can. For most planes in War Thunder, this is just going to be the highest speed at which you can fully deflect the elevators. Although for some planes, the structural integrity of the airframe is the limiting factor. I'm looking at you, F8 Crusader. Generally though, it's most important to know the range of speeds where your aircraft is agile. Think about it this way. If the airspeed is too high, the air moving over the control surfaces is just too fast, and the force it applies to that surface is so high that they can't move out, which is the same as the previous example. If you're compressing, you're not going to be able to pull the elevators hard enough to turn quickly, right? However, if you're going too slowly, and the air moving over the extended elevator is too slow to generate the maximum amount of force and turn the plane, then you're also not going to pull a good turn rate. For a light and agile plane like the Zero, the maneuvering speeds are going to be a lot lower than in a big heavy boy like the P-51, which is optimized for higher speeds. The P-51 is just not going to compress as easily, but also it's heavier, so it does quite badly at low speeds as well. You think about it, because the P-51 is so heavy, the amount of force that the elevators have to generate to actually turn that big heavy boy is going to be higher, right? So it needs bigger elevators, and it needs more air flowing over those elevators to generate that extra force. This is going to dictate at the most basic level how you play your aircraft and what it's good at. Lastly, we have critical Mach. And honestly, this is more of just an interesting mini story rather than anything that's super relevant, because critical Mach is the airspeed at which the flow of air over some part of the aircraft reaches Mach 1. And this is usually going to happen on the wings. For gameplay purposes, War Thunder often just treats this the same as the red line speed, and it will just rip your wings off if you're going too fast in Mach. In real life though, this was a significant problem, especially for early transonic aircraft. And it didn't just rip your wings off when you reached that speed. As critical Mach was reached, shockwaves would begin to form on the wings, and notably on the horizontal stabilizers. Those are the little wings at the back where the elevators live. Behind these shockwaves, the flow of air was heavily disrupted and could often separate from the wing entirely. This meant there was no air flowing over the control surfaces. And if you were paying attention earlier, you'll learn what happens when there's no air flowing over the control surface. They don't do anything. Some planes would also naturally want to pitch downwards when they reached critical Mach, as disrupted airflow could also cause the wings to stop generating lift properly. The P-38 Lightning was especially notorious for this. If you went too fast, the aircraft would start pitching forwards and the elevators stopped working, which would lead to an unrecoverable dive. This phenomenon is called Mach tuck, and it's the reason why supersonic aircraft today don't have elevators at all. The entire horizontal stabilizer moves instead. And well, that is all for today, chaps. Don't forget to smash that like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And you can also join my Discord, link down below, if you would like to have input on future videos. I do read every comment on these videos, but I also put up polls in my Discord of, like video ideas and ask people what they think about them and things like that. So if you want to have some input before the video goes live, come say hi. So thank you for coming, guys, and I will see you in the next one.